Hello, everybody. This Machine Kills Fascists, and my name is Dorian Wallace, he, him, and I facilitate this podcast for conversations, essay readings, and various things to talk about organizing in a healthy way and understanding and organizing through fascism in a healthy way. So today I don't have any guests on. I'm actually going to be reading something from my Substack, which is doriansmode.substack.com. But this is on understanding high control dynamics. From cults to toxic workplaces, many high control environments share similar patterns of manipulation and abuse. So before beginning, I just want to give a little bit of insight into why I'm aware of how cults work and why I have some experience with them. The first and foremost area is I run a cult recovery support group through the Lalich Center, which is Janja Lalich, the well-known and well-respected cult sociologist. She has an organization called the Lalich Center for Cults and Coercive Control. I do a music therapy, really a music and emotional support group where we, over a 4-week period, once a week, meet with cult survivors and work on music that took place during their time, either in the cult or time before or after the cult. And it's about rebuilding your life and your relationship with music and your relationship to music as a way for cult survivors to take back their life. Now, the other piece is that a lot of my work in regards to music therapy has been around hospice care, which is end of life care, people on their deathbeds. I provide music therapy for people and their families, patients who are passing away, as well as working within the prison system. I've worked at Rikers Island, Crossroads Detention Center, Sing Sing Prison, doing music therapy and a music emotional support work. Due to an incident in which I was out of work for a period of time, I was just at home, kind of passing my time watching cult documentaries that were on Netflix. I was just binge watching. It was a workers' comp situation, so I was out of work for about a month, maybe I think 3 weeks. But anyways, during that period, got I ended up reading a book on cults by Janja Lalich, and it really broke down the behavioral mechanisms of cultic groups, and it really helped me understand on a behavioral level what is going on in abusive relationships, what is going on in cultic dynamics, but specifically from my perspective, what is going on within gang dynamics, because a lot of the folks that we work with who are locked up inside, they are gang associated or organized in groups that we might call a gang or identify as a gang. And these dynamics are very similar. There are sociological differences, and I want to point that out, that there are sociological differences between all of these groups and all of these individuals and all these communities. However, behaviorally, you can still pay attention to sort of the structure that's going on. And last but not least, the thing that this dynamic has helped me understand working in the cult spaces is it's helped me understand that concept of fundamentalism. A lot of people who might identify as a fundamentalist or a reactionary or an extremist will, even if they are ideologically aligned with something, they will oftentimes make exceptions for things in their life, either people they know or circumstances in which they're able to justify something. So it helped me understand theological and ideological beliefs, political beliefs, that we, even the people who are quote unquote the most devout to an ideology, there's differences. Like if you have two members of the same cult, talking about the theology of their group or the ideology of their group or the politics of their group, they're going to be similar, but they're not going to be identical, at least by the time they're out of the group. So it's just it gave me some nuance in that space, and it also gave me some nuance in identifying in the prison system. Like, let's say I go into a dorm setting, and for those of you who have not been inside of a dorm, they're basically large rooms with beds where all the incarcerated folks live, and it's split usually into two pieces. One is the sleeping area and one is the eating slash rec area. And then there's like the bathrooms and showers, but everybody lives together. Yeah, so it's a little intense, but if there's issues between folks, that can be a little intense. But the reason I bring up the cult dynamics is it really helped me understand how to start to pay attention to behavior patterns, to figure out what the hierarchy is in which you're working through. So, for instance, if I go into a house where there is a literal set leader of a gang, and he runs the whole thing, he's not going to tell me that that is his role. No one's going to tell me that role. So I pay attention to behavior patterns like this, and utilizing these behavior pattern identifications, it just starts to help identify where the hierarchy is, and it identifies how you can work through something. So I will often give attention or give something to the leader, like control of the music for the first couple songs, or just things like that. And I want to point out that these are not things that I necessarily want or agree with or any of that, but it is a reality of these behavior patterns. And that's why I think it's really important for activists to have at least a basic understanding of cultic dynamics. So let me read the essay. Narcissistic abuse, cults, abusive relationships, hate groups, traffickers, gangs, insular communities, toxic workplaces, the troubled teen industry, and narcissistic family systems can appear different on the surface, whether it be outward-facing aesthetics, presented ideology, different victimology, etc. However, in actuality, they operate using the same underlying principles of control and coercion. High control groups coerce and manipulate people psychologically and emotionally to foster irrational dependency, unquestioning obedience, and exploitative loyalty. Recognizing these tactics helps people identify manipulation, reclaim agency, and seek support. Common behavior dynamics. I'm going to list a couple of things. So, isolating members from outside support, controlling information to limit critical thinking. It's really important that they exploit vulnerabilities to deepen dependence. They use fear, guilt, and shame to suppress dissent. And they undermine autonomy and blur personal boundaries. Next list I'm going to read from is common group structure. There's the top leader or top leaders. These individuals hold absolute authority. They shape beliefs and rules. The sub-leaders, they enforce control and maintain internal order. Core members, they promote the group ideology and they're committed to the group. And then there are rank and file, and these are the obedient followers who have little influence. And last but not least, and I think this is a very interesting group to consider when doing political analysis, but it is fringe membership or fringe members. These are less certain, less committed, uncertain, and testing boundaries. Now, a way to put this in a contemporary American context is there are a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump that literally do not follow the news and literally just knew some basic propaganda of he's a businessman, he's going to make decisions like that. Uh, and these are a lot of the same folks who are now very much regretting their vote for Trump because they didn't realize what they were voting for. This sounds absurd to people who are in the know, but you have to look at this almost as a cultic dynamic. And if you look at that sort of behavior as fringe membership, those are people who are not rank and file to the top authority. Um, yeah, so it's just something that I think needs to be explored a little bit more. Core psychological dynamics. Here's another list. So totalism. This demands total control over members' lives and minds, and we'll get into what that even means. The in-group, out-group mentality. As outsiders are dehumanized or seen as threats. Consider any toxic religious group and their views on the LGBTQ community. Dichotomous thinking. Everything is all good or all bad. There's no nuance. This is important for our organizing work because we cannot think of things as all good or all bad. We have to understand how people get to places. And finally, cognitive dissonance. And this is holding conflicting beliefs but staying due to pressure or fear. And pressure can be anything from your family lives there and you don't want to leave because you're comfortable. It can be that simple. Who wants to move and change their life? It's not always something people want to do. And if you're in a particularly high pressure situation, it is less likely that you're going to leave. One thing I try to emphasize whenever I do a master class or whenever I do a lecture or speak to students, anything like that, but when people ask me what a cult is, I tell them, you already know what a cult is. And the question that I ask is, how many of you have witnessed or experienced being in one or are currently in a relationship in which you know that it is toxic to be with the partner and yet the person still stays? Have any of you witnessed that, experienced it, or are currently experiencing it? You don't have to raise your hand. It is just a question to consider. So I put the question out there, and a lot of people do raise their hands. And the argument is that is a cult. A cult is that dynamic. It is abuse and coercion, making sure a person stays under the control of some form of narcissistic abuse or exploitative abuse. So that's really what we're working with. So models of control, this is coercive control. Coercive control is a pattern of psychological and emotional manipulation meant to dominate victims through fear, surveillance, isolation, and economic control. Often without physical violence, this cumulative behavior creates severe, long-lasting psychological harm. So there are going to be threats of intimidation, surveillance, and micromanagement, isolation from support networks, financial restriction or dependency, gaslighting, and manipulation. And of course, the outcome is diminished autonomy, chronic fear, and a loss of self. This happens across spaces. This happens across gender. This happens across ethnicity. This happens across age. This happens across intellect. This happens across ability. This is something that I want to emphasize. It helped me as a therapist empathize on how you can be an upper class white woman who is a sexual assault victim, a chronic sexual assault victim and emotional abuse victim due to a yoga cult that they joined and had been stuck in for 10 years. But this is a way that helped me see the universal horizontal experiences of somebody maybe of that description and seeing an equality of being abused and strong survivorship within let's say, a poverty class Black trans female who is gang affiliated and or justice involved, regularly incarcerated, and regularly experiencing poverty, you can then look at these two seemingly different folks and actually see them as a united human experiencing a human thing. So yeah, it can happen in also any level of severity too. This can happen in small levels. It can happen all the way up to really big dramatic things like what you might say took place with, let's say, the Nexium cult, or the Nuwabian Nation cult, or Jonestown cult, or the Nazi Germany cult. But the point is is that these behaviors are what we're looking at, no matter the size. So a very important term is thought reform. So instead of brainwashing, I use the term thought reform. So this was developed by psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton. He is extremely important in cult recovery work. Thought reform outlines 8 key tactics used in high control environments to reshape identity, suppress critical thinking, and enforce ideological conformity. These methods are commonly found in cults, authoritarian movements, and abusive systems. So the 8 terms are milieu control, and this is where you restrict access to outside information. Mystical manipulation, and this uses divine signs to reinforce authority. Now, when we're using the word divine, we're not talking about supernatural. We're talking about the psychological experience of of feeling something. This can be synchronicity is a term that is used sometimes, in which you may notice something at a, like, it might feel like something aligns, and even though thousands of things were aligning and you just happen to choose that one, there's that moment of synchronicity where you sort of associate this with that. And so I just want to point that when we're talking about divinity in this sense, we're talking about a psychological experience. The term had not quite been ironed out when Robert J. Lifton came up with these terms, but just keep this all in mind. There's also a demand for purity. This enforces impossible moral standards, weaponizes guilt. If you have ever heard about the troubled teen industry, one of the first things that they do after they kidnap, to be frank, after they kidnap these children, is they give them a rule book that is so thick and so dense that it is impossible uh, to follow these rules. And if there is any break, uh, then there are severe punishments. So demand for purity. Confession is another part. This is forces self-blame and vulnerability as control. Now, this is a tricky one to navigate through, and I think it takes some nuance to get through. But you have to realize in our work, we are working on holding people accountable, as well as we are working on holding ourselves accountable. Now, the thing is, when we are confessing, this is about forcing somebody to take the blame or to self-blame, self-sabotage, and have vulnerability. So this is a delicate space, and we, as activists working in the caring fields or working in the healing fields, we have to be mindful that we are not forcing people to confess their internal experiences. That's cult shit. Got it? Cool. All right. Next is sacred science. This treats the group's belief as infallible truth. You can see this with libertarians and the way they talk about the markets. If the markets are totally free, they just have this way they work. It's like the only reason we've never had true capitalism. We've never had true free market capitalism. But We really should, because once that happens, everything just evens out. It's a sacred science. It doesn't actually make sense. There is just too much that goes into how labor works. There's too much in how industry works. It's a way to look at the sacred science. We also have loading the language, and this is using jargon to limit thought and communication. This one is complicated too, because sometimes people think technical terms is loading the language. The way that I think about it, the way that I try to process this is, if a person is using sociological terms in an incorrect way, that is loading the language. Prime example might be teaching mindfulness in a cult and saying you have to stop your feelings, you have to stop your reactions. No mindfulness teacher would teach that. That's not in Buddhist literature. That is not in mindfulness research. So just start to be aware when jargon doesn't make sense. Jordan Peterson is a major example to look at for somebody who loads the language with jargon. Doctrine over people is another principle, and this invalidates personal experiences. Now, this is an interesting one too, because as a leftist, we are often talking about social forces, white supremacy, patriarchy, fascism, things that are not the people themselves, but things that are happening beyond the people. And we have to remember that lived experience is an important acknowledgement. Just because somebody has not experienced something you haven't, or you have experienced, or just because somebody has experienced something that you can't really even comprehend what it's like, we just have to remember that there are lived experiences within our communicating. And then, of course, last but not least, dispensing of existence. And this demonizes or cuts off those who leave. So, this is, you're not part of it, we're not talking to you anymore. This is also complicated because in narcissistic abuse recovery, cutting off a narcissist is a very important piece of recovery. So, you can see how a lot of these things, you have to pay attention to what sort of way it's falling when you see these behaviors. Another term to learn is called bounded choice, and this was coined by sociologist Janja Lalich, one of my mentors. Bounded choice describes how individuals in high control groups remain committed even to their own harm through a closed system of belief and behavior. Members internalize group demands as personal choices due to four interlocking elements. These four interlocking elements are charismatic authority, which is the emotional dependence on a leader. Transcendent belief system. This is all actions serve as a higher purpose. Systems of control. This is the rules, punishment, and surveillance systems that are taking structure over people's lives. And then there's systems of influence, and this is the culture of the group and relationships, and it shapes how people think and feel. You can see this in capitalism. We think of things in a neoliberal way. You have to get a good job to make a living. It's a very strange concept. If you don't have a job, you can become homeless. These are creations of capitalism. They're not natural functions. They are just what we've created. So, there are many people who still live without what we would call a home in this part of the world in this time period. So it's just something to consider. There's also the cycle of abuse. This was first proposed by Lenore E. Walker in 1979. The cycle of abuse explains recurring patterns in abusive relationship dynamics, moving through phases of tension, violence, reconciliation, and calm. The cycle applies broadly to generational or systemic abuse. Though Walker's original model focused specifically on intimate partner violence, so the cycle is tension building, which is the conflict, fear, or stress rising. There is the incident. This is where the abuse occurs. This can be verbal, emotional, physical, financial, sexual. Reconciliation. This is where excuses are made, apologies happen, or love bombing. And then, of course, calm, the temporary peace until the cycle repeats. Now, again, all of these are frameworks to utilize to examine in real time. So it is not that the cycle of abuse is a guaranteed response of this is going to happen every single time. What it is an identifier for generalized behavior patterns that you can either identify in your own relationships or identify within the relationships of the people you're working with. And there's a lot of complex ways on getting through some of this. For instance, there can be abusive relationships within marginalized communities, and that you have to find spaces of solidarity while also acknowledging the abuse that's taking place. And then I really want to do this, the propaganda model, but this was developed by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, and the propaganda model explains how corporate mass media serves elites' interest by filtering information through 5 structural biases, or what we might call lenses. It shows how media systems manufacture public public consent for political and economic agendas by promoting systemic bias, suppressing dissent, and reinforcing the status quo. So the first thing whenever you're watching media is figure out who the ownership is. So media controlled by corporate interests. So who owns it? If you're looking at Fox News, it is Rupert Murdoch who owns it. If you're looking at the Washington Post, it is Jeff Bezos who owns it. Then you look at advertising. This is dependence on advertising revenue influences content. So pay attention to what kind of ads are being pushed, what kind of products are being sold, what kind of messages are being presented, and what kind of cultural norms are being plastered into the advertisement. Sourcing. This is reliance on government or corporate sources for information. So learn where these sources are coming from. This helped me break away from any of the nonsense that I used to fall for when I was younger, of like Alex Jones or Jimmy Dore type stuff, where they were independently owned, and so yeah, like like that didn't bother me. Like, and then their advertisements seemed to be like people that they were like-minded with. But the sourcing was where I started to be like, I think these dudes are full of shit. Because you start to learn where are they getting their info from, and you can never find it. They're making it up. Yeah, so this really helped me navigate media. Then there's flack, and we're looking for flack is where the punishment or backlash against the dissenting narratives. So how do people respond when somebody gives a dissenting narrative? And pay attention, because not all dissenting narratives are equal. Not all dissenting narratives require the same amount of criticism. The way that I kind of like to explain it is through, for instance, like conspiracy theories. Somebody who does not believe the full story, or does not believe we have been told the full story of 9/11, is technically a 9/11 truther. Just like somebody who thinks that the planes were holograms and that the World Trade Center itself was a hoax through some kind of CGI and techno gears or whatever, technology. That person is also a 9/11 truther or conspiracy theorist. And so, both of these people can get flack. And so pay attention to what flack is happening and what punishments happen. This is one reason I do not buy the cancel culture narrative that takes place for many, many, many celebrities who get quote unquote canceled. I have not seen the government inflict punishment when somebody says a dissenting narrative. For instance, Louis C.K., who's a comedian who I enjoyed very much for a long time. Um, but he had people come forward that he had been doing these strange behaviors, sexual. I think it would be harassment. It's an extreme form of harassment. But he would basically get female comedians up into his room, and he would then, in like a joking way, ask if he could masturbate with them in the room. He's a powerful comedian, so these women would say, "Yeah, sure, I don't mind." Like they would say like that, like just sort of trying to brush it aside. Then he would stand in the doorway, blocking them from getting out, and he would just masturbate. So a couple people came forward about this, and Louis C.K., to his credit, the very next day put out a statement saying everything they're saying is true. I have a lot to work on. I need to shut up and listen. So I'll give him credit where credit's due. Uh, but the point is that he basically had a year off, and I'm not going to get all the details correct, but he basically had a year off. He lost money, and he then came back, got a Grammy for one of his albums. He has had a special every year that's been successful. Uh, he still gets crowds. I've had various activists even tell me they're like, I think he's done his part. And not everybody agrees with that, but like the point is like I've heard it from female activists. And so the reason I bring all of this up is that there's this bizarre argument within the patriarchy that he is an example of cancel culture. He never got canceled for saying like a freedom of speech thing. He got quote unquote, he had his break because he openly admitted to doing a severe form of sexual harassment. Now, no charges were pressed, but I have to tell y'all that I have worked with people who are locked up for these very reasons. Because you have to realize that even though he was maybe not planning on doing anything, and even though he had asked permission, quote unquote, he's a powerful person. He said something in a joking way, the person not knowing he was actually going to do it. He then stood in the door blocking it and began to pull his genitalia out and touch himself sexually, blocking the door. So you have to realize that people don't know what's going to happen next. Is he going to become a violent person suddenly? Is he have weapons? Are there, there are just all these pieces to it that you have to understand where the PTSD comes from for the survivor, where all of a sudden they have the fear of being imprisoned. And so from my point of view, this dude did not get canceled. And so when you look at flack and people try to make this argument in the media that the cancel culture has gotten out of hand or whatever, look at the punishment and look at the backlash against dissenting narratives. I don't think it's happening the way that sometimes reactionaries present it. Yeah, this happened during COVID too. So, and then last but not least, there's fear. Now, they used to call it in this book anti-communism, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, there really has been a shift towards terrorism. And so they generalized it. Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky generalized this more to fear. But this is the use of fear to maintain control. And you are seeing this right now. They are intentionally trying to identify every immigrant as a gang member, and they are trying to identify gangs as terrorism, the Trump administration. And the reason for this, it ups the intensity, it ups the ability in legal terms on what they're able to do in regards to human rights abuses. This is horrible, um, but yeah. So to review the propaganda model, when you're watching media or reading media, just try to figure out the ownership of the media, the advertisements, like what is it selling, or what are happening within the ads around it. Sourcing, where is the information coming from? Flack, what is the backlash or punishment against dissenting narratives? And then use of fear to maintain controls. And to finish this, I'm just going to read a list because I think this has helped a lot of people who have read this essay, but I'm just going to put it in talking form so that people can hear it. But there are types of high control groups. Now, I want to emphasize that not all organizations, belief systems, or communities are high control groups. This list is intended to expand awareness of how coercive control and abuse of power can appear across many contexts. It's not to stigmatize new religious movements. It's not to stigmatize fringe politics. It's not to stigmatize unconventional lifestyles that do not rely on manipulation or domination. So here we go. First large category, commercial groups. This includes multi-level marketing or MLMs. This is recruitment-driven sales models. There are financial scams, which is Ponzi schemes or fraud-based criminal organizations. And then there are toxic workplaces. This is workplaces or corporations that demand extreme loyalty and compliance. If you've ever had a toxic boss who makes you work after hours, this is a toxic workplace. Second group category, community-based groups. And this can include niche communities, the insular groups with rigid ideological control, or social clubs, which is groups that enforce strict behavioral expectations. This is a complex one because you can look at groups like the Haredi or Hasidic Jewish people, the religious Jewish people, or the Amish, and there's a place where you have to find a line of understanding that people are allowed to live the way that they want to live or feel they should be living. And that should be allowed and that should be defended and protected. There are also, however, abuses happening within these communities, and people who want to get out of these communities and feel trapped need the ability, they should have the ability to leave if they want to. And they should be able to stay in communication with their families. This is another thing, or their loved ones. Yeah. So then we get to domestic and family groups. This can be abusive families or guardians. They control thought, emotional, psychological, or physical abuse. This can be abusive relationships. This is domination through coercion and dependency. You can be born into a cult, and this is indoctrination from childhood. Think of any mega church that you either belong to, have belonged to, or you knew about within your town that had maybe some questionable behaviors or questionable devotion from its membership. And then there's the troubled teen industry, and this one is a tough one for me personally. It makes me a little sick when working with survivors from this, not due to the survivors, but just with the type of abuse and the type of victimology. This one really gets to me. But the troubled industry is a for-profit industry marketed as rehabilitation for at-risk youth, employing abusive tactics and extreme discipline to enforce compliance. I also think this is a time that is important to remember that a lot of the troubled teen industry was made popular by people like Dr. Phil and Oprah and Dr. Oz, and we need to remember that these thought leaders, these mass media figures, are culpable for some of these cultic dynamics and getting people involved in cults, so or high control groups. Next category is the ideological groups. This is conspiracy movements like QAnon, for instance, spreading fear and misinformation to maintain control. Media or disinformation networks, parasocial commitments to media sources. Alex Jones is a good example. Tucker Carlson is a good example. Just where you feel like you have a relationship with this media figure or this information network, and they are intentionally selling you bad information as if it's good information. There are personality cults. This is excessive admiration for a single leader. Political cults, this is rigid ideological movements enforcing strict adherence. This is important because you will notice in like if you come across a socialist cult, even if they are saying the ideology or the principles that one might adhere if they identify as a socialist within the group, the high control group, these behaviors are actually taking place in the high control way as opposed to these socialist humanist principles. Um, and then there are religious and spiritual cults. And this is probably the most well known example of a cult. And this is mostly because of the cult and media relationship from groups like Heaven's Gate and Jim Jones and Jonestown, where there were these massive suicides by weird, strange religious groups. Oh, and Waco, Texas. So this is why people associate cult with religious group, mostly due to which media was being shown. So then we have political violence and paramilitary groups. So in this group, there's autocracies that centralize authoritarian rule. There's colonial or imperialist forces, and this is controlled through coercion and violence. There are ethno-nationalist militias, like the Contras are a good example. They promote racial or national supremacy. There are national narco militias and mercenaries. These are organized violence for profit or power. And then there are revolutionary movements and resistance groups using militant tactics. Now, I tend to align. This is why I think this is important. I tend to align with some revolutionary movements going on at the moment. I agree with them. I am aligned with these groups. This does not mean that there cannot be toxic behavior within groups that we support and or groups we should not support because their toxic behavior is so corrupt. Doesn't matter what your quote unquote ideology is. The behavior is what we're paying attention, at least in regards to paying attention to high control dynamics. There are also therapeutic and wellness groups. This is another large category. This can include pseudoscience or quackery, which is exploiting scientific misinformation. Again, there's nothing wrong with alternative medicine, for instance. I actually support a lot of use of alternative medicine. You just have to be aware of what you are doing, when what the promises are being made, and how the person is making the money off of it or off of you. And it doesn't have to just be financial gain. It can also be emotional gain or labor gain. There's self-help or productivity cults. This is pressuring followers into extreme self-improvement regimens. They oftentimes give a class for cheap or for free, and then offer more information at the next extremely high class, and they just uh, they just lure you in that way. And then we have underground economy groups. Uh, these are high control groups that operate within illegal or unregulated markets using coercion, deception, or exploitation to maintain power and financial gain. So this is organized syndicates, large scale organizations engaged in illegal activities such as trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and racketeering. There are human trafficking networks. This is everything from pimps who have a group of women that they keep under their control, all the way to somebody as hideous as Jeff Epstein, who would basically kidnap women for the weekend and put them in horrifying situations and then try to pay them to be quiet or threaten them to be quiet because he had so much power. So yeah, sorry. Human trafficking networks, enterprises exploiting people for labor, sexual exploitation, or other forms of involuntary servitude. Then there are what I call street gangs, or what many call street gangs. These are localized groups that engage in activities such as drug distribution, violence, often amongst each other, often over relational reasons, and territorial control. There is also a term that I really want to emphasize for everybody here, but it's called deputy gangs. These are corrupt factions within law enforcement agencies that operate with impunity, engage in violence, cover-ups, and abuses of power. There are literally groups in LA that have been uncovered to have gang signs and tattoos, just like any other street gang, but found within the LA Sheriff's Department. So, yeah, um, and they're not just in California. That's just where one of the most prominent, well-known ones is from. And then, of course, fraud and scamming rings. And this is criminal networks specializing in identity theft, financial fraud, phishing schemes, or other forms of deception. Probably one of the worst examples to use of financial fraud is Bernie Madoff. And if you don't understand finances, which, it took me some time to understand it, all it means is that he stole a lot of money and he lied about a lot of money and people gave him money. And it's more complex than that, but the general gist of it is people gave him money with a certain trust and he lied to their faces and took all their money. And then a crash happened and he had none of their money to give back to them. All right. And I'm not going to read all the terms because no, I should. I'm just going to read all the terms and then we'll get out of here. So, types of abuse: systemic abuse, exploiting social, institutional, and structural systems to harm or control individuals, perpetrating inequality, oppression, and exploitation. Psychological abuse, manipulating someone's mind through gaslighting, threats, isolation, and control tactics to undermine their sense of ability. Emotional control, controlling someone's emotions through criticism, humiliation, or guilt, or to dominate their emotional well-being. Verbal abuse, using insults, threats, and harsh language to demean or intimidate, leading to emotional harm. Physical abuse, inflicting harm or intimidation through physical force, such as hitting, kicking, or choking to maintain control. Sexual abuse, coercing or forcing consensual sexual activity, violating personal autonomy and causing emotional and physical harm. Financial abuse, restricting access to money or resources, creating dependency and limited somebody's ability to escape or assert independence. Digital abuse, using enterprise to harass, monitor, or control someone, including cyberstalking and sending harmful messages. Spiritual abuse, exploiting religion or spiritual beliefs to help manipulate or control someone, distorting someone, their faith, and their dominance. Legal abuse, misusing the legal system to harass, intimidate, control someone, such as through fringe lawsuits and custody battles or weaponizing restraining orders. Reputational abuse, this is damaging someone's reputation or social standing through slander, public humiliation, or spread through false information to control or harm them. Stalking, persistent unwanted attention of surveillance designed to instill fear, intimidation, and restrict the people's freedom. And then finally, blackmail, threatening to reveal private or damaging information unless the demands are met, often involving emotional, financial, or reputational harm. I'll leave it at that. There's a few more descriptions, definitions, but you can check out the link in the description. Again, today was Dorian's mode going solo, and I was just reading an essay from my blog, or from my Substack, doriansmode.substack.com. You can also check me out at www.com. The article is called Understanding High Control Dynamics from Cults to Toxic Workplaces. Many high control environments share similar patterns of manipulation and abuse. Anyways, everybody, it was great to be here with y'all, and I hope to see y'all next time. Peace. This machine counts fascist. 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 This machine counts fascist.
machine kills fascists. This machine kills fascists.